That's a very interesting story. You asked me, why do you not write poetry anymore? Because everyone says, Alan, you're a great poet. They read your books. They talk about you on the radio. They seem to think that you're a special poet. Well, you know something? I stopped writing poetry at the age of 50. And there was a very good reason for me. I had never read a poem that was ever written by anyone over the age of 50 or 60 that did anything for me. I grew up reading the poetry of the Beat generation of Gregory Corso, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg. And when they wrote their poetry, they were young, they were idealistic, they were passionate. And that's the word. That's the word. I wrote poetry when I was passionate about something. And to me, what occurred was that most of the poetry I had ever read, and I'm talking about modern poetry, I'm not talking about Yeats and poetry of the past, I'm talking about the poetry of the 20th century, okay? Most of the poetry I had ever read that did anything for me was poetry that was written, composed by young men, right? People who were idealistic, who were passionate, who were in the midst of life and wrote down their thoughts. Now, a lot of them lived long lives and kept on writing poetry right until, in many cases, until they died. But for me, whenever I picked up this poetry, I could tell how old the poet was at that time. And for me, that was very important, because you never make any money out of poetry, and I didn't write it for recognition. I wrote it because I was passionate, right? And I had never read any modern poetry written by anyone over the age of, say, 50, approximately, that did anything for me. It seemed that what had happened is by the time they were 50 or 60 or even 70, they had honed their skills and they could write. The syntax was right, the rhythm was right, the prose was right, even the philosophy was right. But what was missing was passion. What was missing was idealism. And that's what I felt when I wrote poetry. And when I reached the age of 50 or so, I thought, I've said it all. I'm not saying that the rest of my life is not going to be passionate or idealistic, or I'm not going to get excited about something, or never fall in love again, or none of those things. But I felt I couldn't write it anymore. I thought that I would have to sit down and think about it. And I didn't want to read that, and I didn't want to write it. So it meant nothing to me. So at the age of 50 or 52, I can't remember exactly, I said, that's it. I've written, I'm lucky enough to have had 5, 6 poetry books published and to have had some recognition. And that was it. I stopped. Now, I'm not saying that I couldn't have written poetry after that, but somehow I didn't want to read my own poetry. And that truly is the reason why I stopped writing poetry.